Alright, so in this video we're going to be completing the metaphor of the moral compass, and in doing so we're going to have to talk about due south. What is the opposite of true north? And if we look at this moral compass, what we see is that true north is happiness. True north is success. And if happiness and success is defined by the pursuit of purpose and meaning in your life, then the opposite of happiness must be defined by the pursuit of meaninglessness, or the pursuit of purposelessness. And so, in order to look at this, we have to just put a definition down there to utilize, and a perfect antonym to happiness is depression. And so if we look at the word depress, to depress just means lower in spirit, to lower your consciousness, to have less experience ultimately, because depress means to lower your consciousness, and depression is a reduction in activity. It's a reduction in action. It's a reduction in the amount of action, in the amount of experience that you're having. It's a reduction in the quality of experiences that you're having. So if you still are having experiences, you're not engaging in it very effectively. You're not getting more out of these experiences, and also you're getting a reduction in willpower and a reduction in force as well. And so depression is our emotional response to failing to pursue any purpose in our lives, to pursue purpose in our lives at all. And so what it is our conscience punishing us for doing something that's a very seriously wrong thing to do to ourselves. Okay? Inaction is a very seriously wrong thing to do, because our human consciousness exists solely to get us in action, to get us to take actions, to do things, to become things. And if you're rejecting the idea of doing and becoming things, then you're going to experience depression. You're going to experience the feeling of purposelessness, meaninglessness, because you're not experiencing life. You're not living life to its fullest. And ultimately, we're mostly doing that because we're feeling bad, and we're associating this feeling bad feeling, this feeling of fear, this feeling of anxiety, of trepidation, of worry. And we're saying, I don't want any more of those feelings. And so if I just don't do anything, then I won't feel those feelings anymore. And you see how that becomes a pursuit. Your pursuit is actually going away from having feelings because these feelings are hurting you, when in actuality what these feelings are trying to tell you is that we'll stop hurting you when you start doing something in your life, when you start taking action and having more experience and trying your best. And you don't have to do anything spectacular in order to start this process, start heading to true north. All that you have to do is start doing something. Put yourself in the game. Get in there and start trying things. Just try to make your bed in the morning, or just try to do the dishes. Try to clean up your room a little bit. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular. But the point is that depression is the opposite of happiness in this metaphor that we are creating. And so from here, now that we have north and south, we can actually complete the moral compass. And so on the moral compass, depression is pointing due south, and it's opposite to success and happiness, which is pointing true north. And between happiness and depression is good and evil, right and wrong, positive and negative emotion. And we have to point this out that, so east is evil, okay? So pointing east, that's where evil is, and pointing west is good. And so we have to understand that this is a compass that allows us to feel the maximum amount of emotions that we can possibly feel. So we include both good and evil in that state, both positive emotions and negative emotions in that state. So this encompasses the entire spectrum of the individual being able to feel things. And ultimately, this is Kundalini. This is the Sushumna Nadi, okay? And I want to point out here also that good is not pointing true north. Okay, good is east, because too much good in our lives, too much right action, too much doing the right thing, that leads to stagnation. It leads to less experience, because if you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again that you already know, then you're not experiencing anything new. If you're just saying 2 + 2 = 4, day in and day out, you're right, you're correct, you're good, right? But you're just doing 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 2 = 4. You're not experiencing anything new except for things that you already know. And so that leads to a very mundane and boring life. It leads to an existential crisis, which we'll talk about later on. Wrong action, on the other hand, is exciting, because you're learning something new when you go into experiencing these wrong actions, into experiencing feeling bad. When you go and you try a new experience and you do it completely wrong and you completely embarrass yourself in front of a whole group of people, that's a very that makes you feel bad, but it also tells you what the right thing to do is in that particular situation, in this brand new experience where you didn't know what the right thing to do is. It's like a fish out of water scenario in movies. You get this hero guy and you put him into a situation that he's not comfortable in, and then suddenly you see the cracks in the hero. And you see his faults, and it's because he's experiencing something brand new that the viewer of the channel knows is wrong, but he doesn't know that just yet. And so he has to learn, and you get to see how he experiences those things. And so that's what makes things fun, is failing in the process of experiencing new things, learning from those things, figuring out what the right thing to do is, and then moving on with your life, okay? And that's what's going to make you feel most lived through, and most you're going to enjoy that the most, compared to just doing good, which will actually end up forcing you to stagnate and not feel good, get you pointing closer towards depression. And so you need some wrong action. You need to make some mistakes over time. And so we could just look at this in terms of working out. You go to the gym, and you're not going to gain any muscle by lifting weights that you already know that you can lift. The only way that you're going to gain muscle is to experience failure, whether mentally or physically. And that means that you're going to have to fail in order to gain muscle. And that's just like how we learn everything. All right. And so both good and evil, you have to experience both good and evil in order to experience happiness as a human individual. You can't reject or just simply reject one, or simply accept the other one and then reject the other one. You have to be both good and evil, both right and wrong, because in order to gain more right in our lives, we have to be wrong a lot, and we have to accept this. We have to accept that new experiences are going to cause us to feel uncomfortable because it's trying to tell us that we did something wrong in that new experience, okay? So we've talked about this nearly to death at this point. I just put them on east and west on the moral compass so we can see them. And so in this video, what we're actually going to be talking about is moral relativism and nihilism. We're going to talk about due south because, we haven't talked about that yet. And it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of weird mental games that occur within us and around us when we start pursuing meaninglessness, pursuing purposelessness, because it's usually not something that people just outright accept, and then they go, all right, I'm going to have no purpose in my life. That's not really usually how this stuff starts. Usually it starts in the realm of rejecting the idea that there are certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong. And there's nothing wrong with actually doing that, all right? The definition of that is moral relativism, really. What you're saying is that you reject this idea of good and evil, right and wrong, and you say that the individual, myself, can choose what is right and choose what is wrong. And that's moral relativism, and moral relativism is the idea that there's no inherent and or objective difference between right and wrong or good and evil, so humanity themselves may arbitrarily create or decide right and wrong for themselves. And so this is an issue when it comes to morality, when it comes to the fundamental underpinnings of what right and wrong actually are. It becomes an issue when we're talking about the 6 wrongs, the boundary line around which there's actions that are always wrong. And that includes murder, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, and lying. And the issue with that is that there's certain things that are just the way that they are, okay? So we go back to the cup example. Based upon the laws of physics and reality, this cup can only be drinking a couple amount of ways, and the most effective way, the most right way, is, through the top like this. Nothing unique about that. And obviously there are wrong ways to drink from this cup. And you could try to drink from the bottom. That's just not going to work. Okay? And so clearly there are rights and wrongs that exist in nature. However, and with that being said, what moral relativism allows us to look at is it allows us to look at a spectrum. It allows us to look at different customs, cultures, and traditions, and it gives us the ability to think a little bit, all right? If we are able to accept the foundational levels of what is right and what is wrong, which essentially is the fundamental underpinning of natural law, which is do not steal, do not commit theft of any kind to any individual, don't infringe on any other individual's rights. If we can just accept that, then and then move forward from there, then moral relativism becomes a game of critical thinking, because in order for moral relativism to work, it must simultaneously acknowledge that there's many different morals that can be right and wrong, okay? Like I always say, there's a couple of different ways that you can drink from this cup of water. There's a couple different ways that you can eat rice, okay? And I don't reject all the right ways to drink from this cup. I'm just saying that there are certain ways that are most right, and that there's certain ways that are okay. If you have a straw, that's perfectly fine. If you want to lap it up like a dog, that'll get the liquid into your body. But maybe there is a most right here. Okay, and with that being said, this spectrum is largely based on custom, culture, and tradition. And every individual's morals have some kind of value, but it must also acknowledge, moral relativism must also acknowledge that clearly some morals are better than others. And if we're smart and if we're able to think, then we ought to be able to choose and change what is most right for us depending on the culture that we find ourselves in. Okay, so Sam Harris explains this when he says that moral view A is truer than moral view B if A entails a more accurate understanding of the connections between human thoughts, intentions, and behavior. So this is what must be present in order for moral relativism to work. The individual has to acknowledge that good morals are dependent upon what is most true, or what gives us a more accurate understanding of the three aspects of consciousness, or as Sam calls it, human thoughts, intention, and behavior, which is the same as thought, emotion, and action. Intention and emotion being the same thing. And so, for example, if you find yourself as an American in a different culture, like in Japan, okay, where it's more right to use chopsticks than it is to use fork and knife, okay? Then if you're in that culture, then just use the chopsticks. That's all that moral relativism is saying, okay? Just be aware of the situation that you find yourself in and think for 2 seconds, ask what the right thing to do is in this particular culture, in this particular custom, and then do what they do. Okay, be observant of the situation that you find yourself in. That's all. Okay, and again, the key here is so long as their culture doesn't infringe upon your rights. Maybe what's more right, but the point is maybe what's more right should be able to fluctuate more freely. Okay, we shouldn't just get really focused on like, no, I'm American, so I'm going to use a fork and knife. It's like just use the chopsticks. That's all this is saying. Okay. And so what this ultimately gives us is more freedom to think and be more accommodating to other cultures, customs, and traditions. However, the problem with moral relativism arises when certain cultures, customs, and traditions reject the fundamental tenets to morality, to human morals, okay? So do not steal, right? So when we allow custom, culture, and tradition to be an excuse for the acceptance of fundamentally wrong ideas, like the acceptance of rape in certain countries, like the acceptance of execution of gays in certain countries, this is when moral relativism really starts to lose its way, okay? So see the difference, right? Moral relativism gives us the ability to think through customs and cultures and traditions and use what is most right in whatever particular situation, so long as whatever is most right in those particular cultures don't infringe upon your rights. Don't do things that are fundamentally wrong, okay? So further, at its core, even talking even more deeply when it comes to moral relativism is if you take this to its logical extreme with moral relativism, what you get is a total rejection of the existence of truth itself. And this is where things really start breaking down with moral relativists, because morality must be seen as in its non-dualistic nature, okay? And thus, it's a study in objectivity. It's a study in behavior, okay? It's the objective difference between right and wrong. And this is truth. This is one truth, one objective truth, that which is, okay? And in following down the path of the extremist idea of moral relativism, what you get is a rejection of our collective shared truth, and is this idea of a collective shared truth is replaced with the much less effective idea of your truth and my truth. And so what you get is people saying, oh, that's just your truth, this is my truth. And that is not what objective truth states. There are different perspectives of truth. I'll clarify that in a later video. But the point is here is that there is only one truth. There's 4 different perspectives of that truth: the individual perspective of the truth, truthfulness, the morals, the justness of the collective that you find yourself in, and then there's also the objective truth. It is raining outside, or the sky is blue, the water is wet. Very truthful statements of what things are, or what it is out there, and also the systems dynamics of stuff as well. But we'll talk about that later on. The point is that if our baseline objectivity is accepted as different from one individual to another, that means that all 7 billion individuals here on Earth have their own truth, then there is no truth. It completely breaks down the idea of truth. And what it creates is our own subjective truth as opposed to one shared objective truth. And this idea is extremely detrimental to our success, because true freedom can never prosper in a society that blindly accepts moral relativism. And this is the concern of moral relativism. What it leads to is we allow people to have certain customs and cultures and traditions that are fundamentally wrong and very dangerous for people to exist within. In fact, a society that fundamentally embraces moral relativism is well on their way to ruin, because if the truth varies from individual to individual, then how can a society truly agree upon anything of value? A society cannot exist with itself if it cannot agree on anything of value. And we're actually seeing this play out right now in politics and on social media of the Western world today, and it's actually driving people literally insane. We're having arguments with people about certain things on grounds that people are saying some things are moral and some things are not moral, or immoral, that are not fundamentally true. People are changing the what is true and what is not true. They're changing the answers to the questions. They're saying that no, in fact, I can drink from a cup of water or a cup of coffee this way. And that's just not true. There are some fundamental truths that we have to agree upon. And they're fundamental, and they're not that big of deals either. But the point here is that most moral relativists actually lose the utility of the choice that we discussed in earlier videos. The choice that actually holds the key to our very happiness. They lose that choice because they've arbitrarily changed the answers to what is right and what is wrong based on their culture, and based on their custom, or based on a tradition. And therefore, they've actually lost any hope for true happiness, because they can truly think or rationalize that they're choosing right action when they're actually truly choosing wrong action. And choosing wrong action comes with consequences, comes with repercussions. So right is always right. Wrong is always wrong. It cannot change because you don't like the answers. And while you can get yourself to rationalize just about any action, you cannot change the laws of nature. You cannot change the way you feel when you commit a wrong action. All you can do is try to ignore the pain and suffering that you're creating for yourself, and that's just going to lead to even more confusion and even more chaos in your life, in the collective by which you exist within. And remember, I didn't make up what is right and wrong. It wasn't created in some boardroom. It wasn't approved by any social justice activists. And it hasn't been A and B tested. It doesn't get updated every 6 months. What is right today is what was right 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And what was wrong yesterday is also wrong today. And there's no changing them, okay? Remember the flexibility that moral relativism gives us on more shallow grounds. As long as we agree not to infringe upon the rights of other individuals, as long as we agree not to violate anyone else's human rights, then, feel free to have a belief that something is more right than another thing. Okay? That's fine. And ultimately, we have to acknowledge that what an amazing world that we live in, where right action actually just so happens to make everything better and happier and more exciting in our lives, and wrong action just so happens to make everything worse. And so long as when we bump into wrong action, we correct ourselves quickly, we can actually create a lot of success for ourselves, and that this path is laid out for all of us. And ultimately, how conceited is it of people to believe that they know what's right and what's wrong better than the actual universe, better than people who have already answered all these questions for us, better than all the smartest philosophers, all the smartest scientists, all the smartest thinkers throughout history who have, by some miracle, figured this stuff out for us. And you think that you can change their answers simply because you somehow know better than them? It's crazy. But worst of all, what moral relativism leads is an erosion of the moral foundation of the individual. Because you'll lose trust in the existence of truth itself. If you think that something is right, that's fundamentally wrong. And that's going to mess with your ability to actually know or be able to experience and see or make sense of the patterns of success that are necessary for you to actually become successful, to actually become happy, because you've changed the answers. And when you lose your trust in what the right thing to do is, what the wrong thing to do is, you lose your purpose and thus your meaning in life. In other words, your moral compass actually falls apart. It becomes useless because what you thought was right is actually wrong. And what you thought was wrong is actually right. So for example, if you believe that it's okay to lie if it gets you what you want, so for example, the ends justifies the means, it doesn't, okay? If you're lying, that lie is always going to create a more worse world for you in the future. But if you believe that you can justify lying on the grounds that maybe it's going to allow you to win an argument, or perhaps it's going to allow you to push some sort of political agenda, some sort of political agenda that's simply untrue, but you think it's justified because the end justify the means, well, that's going to make you very confused when things stop going right in your life, when things start going fundamentally wrong, when you start feeling bad all the time, when you start feeling angry all the time and defensive because everyone seems to be disagreeing with you all the time because you're not telling the truth, you're lying. And so, that's a confusing place to be in, and that'll really mess with your head and with your morals, and it really paves the way for what we're going to talk about next, which is nihilism. Okay, so nihilism is the erroneous belief that there is no truth, okay? That there is no existence or values, and that values are meaningless, okay? It's all rooted in relentless negativity and cynicism, and suggesting that an absence of values and it suggests an absence of values and purpose and meaning within the individual, him or herself. Nihilism undermines existence itself because we need purpose and meaning to exist, and the lonely pursuit of meaninglessness leads to nothing but depression, feelings of hopelessness, a great sense of loss and quit, because you have no meaning and no values, because if you have no meaning and no values, then you have nothing, okay? In other words, the nihilist embraces the contracting force for consciousness, fear. They're depressing themselves, and with that choice, if you'd even give it a choice, it's a lack of choice, really. They actually experience all the inherent degeneracy that comes with that lack of choice, which is ignorance, which is confusion, and ultimately fosters chaos and a need for authoritarianism for all. Nihilism cannot grow and cannot make you, the nihilist cannot grow, they cannot improve. Because they've taken themselves out of the ability to make the choice, because they don't believe that the choice exists. So this makes it impossible for them to actually be happy or successful, because they've rejected the very mechanism that makes us happy. If you don't believe in the choice because you believe that nothing of value exists, and this choice is the ultimate value, then that choice does not exist, and therefore there's no reason to even make a choice. And thus, they've lost their ultimate key to happiness itself. And if the nihilist is put in under any kind of external pressure that comes with decision making, really, then the nihilist chooses neither right action nor wrong action, ultimately because the choice is meaningless. And this is the worst choice of all, because now you don't even have a 50-50 chance of choosing the right action. You've taken yourself out of that process completely, and now you have a 0% chance of happiness. You have a 0% chance of choosing success and right action, and or choosing wrong action and finding out what not to do. And you can't gain any conscious experience with this state of mentality. And ultimately, just survival alone, how could you possibly survive in a universe that forces us to make decisions, let alone be successful in a universe such as one that is as unjust as ours, when you believe that your life has no purpose, when you believe that purpose does not even exist, okay? So our moral purpose, choosing to do good in spite of the choice to do evil, is actually what sustains us when there's nothing left to hold on to. It's the choice that allows us to feel happy. It's the choice that recharges us. It's the choice that actually gives us our second wind. The choice itself is our second wind. We're moving forward and we feel exhausted and we ask ourselves, are we going to choose right action? Are we going to choose wrong action? And we're like, hell yeah, we're going to choose right action, because that's what's going to make us feel good. That's our second wind, and then we're ready to move forward. But ultimately, the nihilist doesn't have the choice, because to them, the choice is meaningless. And so, the moral relativist has the potential to seriously confuse things by falsely making rights wrongs and wrongs rights, and that ultimately leads to this idea that none of this stuff makes any sense. Everything that I try, I created these rights, and maybe these rights don't perfectly align with how I feel, but I made these rights, and nothing's working right in your life. And that's going to lead you to think, well, all of this is meaningless, all of this is purposeless. Everyone that was ever successful, that's all just luck, or because their parents were successful, as if that's an excuse for the kids to be successful. And they just put themselves in the state of victimhood, and they completely accept the idea of oppression Olympics and any other excuse that they can under the sun to justify why people are being successful over them, as opposed to looking at what their choices are in their own lives. The one darn thing that they have control over, they're refusing to take control over, and that's what leads us to feel depressed. It ultimately creates meaninglessness, purposelessness, hopelessness for ourselves, and that's what due south is. And it sucks. I get it. It sucks. I've been there. It sucks. A near constant state of conscious waking energy solely focused on trying to not feel feelings anymore, because the feelings that you're experiencing due to your wrong behavior, due to your lack of behavior, your feeling bad is what you're perceiving. It's all that you want to stop. You just want to stop feeling bad. And so you're trying to get away from things that make you feel bad, okay? And because you know that these feelings are hurting you. And so you associate the feelings as the enemy when they're not. They're just feelings that are trying to tell you that something is fundamentally going wrong, and that the only way to correct yourself is to start taking action. It's through action, through experience, doing new things. And it's going to be tough. It's going to be a challenge to get yourself out of this situation. But that situation was created by moral relativism, by nihilism, which is a type of, and it's just a shame because, again, our culture, our society associates negative emotions as something that we need to get away from, and that's not the case. We can use these emotions to motivate us, to make our beds in the morning, to do a little thing, just a little thing. I just asking for a little thing, one little thing, and then build on that one little thing the next day, and then build upon that one little thing the next day. If this means watching 16 hours of Netflix a day, and changing that to 15 hours and 59 minutes of Netflix a day, and in that 1 minute you make your bed in the morning, that's a victory. Then make that 2 minutes and clean up a part of your room. Don't even clean up your entire room. Clean up just a little bit of your room and then get back to Netflix, okay? And then do one little more thing. Clean your dish after you're done eating. Actually eat something for a change, perhaps. Or eat a little bit less if you're overeating. Just a little bit of right action, just a little bit. Just to get a feeling of a victory, of a win, of overcoming the odds of doing the right thing. And so ultimately, just in closing, what moral relativism, or where moral relativism comes from, and nihilism as well, is from a philosophy known as postmodernism. And postmodernism has a lot of flaws in it that we can't accept. We just can't accept the recent degeneracy, the recent regression, the recent ethnocentrism of postmodernism, and the tribalism of it all together, because it is a mess. But it's a mess simply because they're just rejecting anyone who thinks differently from them. So it's like a simple if-then statement. They're saying, a lot of them are saying, if you don't blindly accept everything that I'm saying, then you're evil. And we know that that's fundamentally wrong. That's ethnocentrism, that's tribalism, there's something wrong there, okay? So they've lost their way, and they've lost their way for a number of reasons that we'll talk about later on. But on this channel, with me, we don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's some good stuff in postmodernism, and some of the creators of postmodernism, the Nietzsche's, the Kant's, the Soren Kierkegaard's, Dostoevsky, these guys, these existentialists, have created something that is fundamentally awesome as well, existentialism and constructionism, that we can talk about, that is extraordinarily useful. So we're not just going to outright reject postmodernism just because it's, the forefront leaders in 2020 today have completely lost their way. That's their issue. We're still going to take what works, and existentialism is dope, and it's a very interesting philosophy, and all of the authors of existentialism who are not French are pretty awesome as well. And so we're going to talk about them later on in later videos. But for this channel, for right now, I just want to get through this talking about emotions and our emotional state, because I feel like I've been doing that forever now. And so I got one more video where we're going to talk about failure, and then we're going to move on to the third aspect of consciousness that we haven't really talked about yet at all, and that is thought, that is thinking. It's talking about the mind and what all is going on there. We're going to build up that foundation next, and I'm super excited to do that and to start that probably on Thursday. So I'll see you all in the next video.